Currently, we are transitioning into a digital era, and we have been for about the last 10, 20 years, really. And what we will have eventually is, or already essentially some countries have, is digital verification, digital ID. And people are rejecting this, but the thing is, this is not much worse than paper ID, than paper verification and such that we used to have. Digital bank accounts is not much different than physical bank accounts. Of course, the same way that there are exploits and there are hacks and such with the the paper, the physical, the old world that we used to function on, there will be exploits in the new world. Of course, I'm not talking about, this video is not about exploits, but it is to say that, that will be a thing. Now, if you do not have a identification, you are nameless. And a nameless person is essentially immune from a kind of governmental, a legal standpoint of everything. The government and corporations are so desperate to get you to do everything in a registered manner because it's under their system. They want you to register your name, they want you to register your location, your banks, all the money you make, all the activity you do, and eventually, or already maybe, your location movement data. So if you look at a phone, it has movement data for where you go, etc., what you are doing. Because the governments are corrupt, they want all this data from us. They want essentially a complete model, and it could be to a point where they want your genetic information as well, assuming that the whole the swab business wasn't a DNA harvesting exercise, which it probably was. As I said, you probably should, or with the ID, it all hinges on the ID. And this isn't to say, if you walk up to a police officer or something and you punch them in the face, they're still going to, tase you or shoot you or punch you back or restrain you, whether you have an identification or not. So of course you need to use a bit of intelligence here. But fundamentally, if you do not have a registered location, a registered name, a registered bank, a registered company, registered anything, if you are a ghost, then at least in the system's rule, the matrix, the government, the system, you are essentially invulnerable. Now, there are other things, for example, with tracing and tracking of computers and IP addresses, and what servers you've been on, what files you've downloaded, what things you've typed, etc. There's all kinds of ways to track people and their activity. So you do have to be careful with this. And I'm not going to tell you and say that you should burn all of your identifications. This is an important thing. The problem is, if you are unable to get a plane to another country, you have to essentially submit to the system of the birth certificate and the passport and identification. If you are unable to store your own money, again, you have to submit. You have to register a bank and do all the nonsense that it requires. If you can't make your own money, then again, the same thing. So essentially, what has happened is that the system has taken control of certain major things like trading, buying, selling, transportation, for example. Even if it's a car or a bike, you're registering these things, or if it's a plane or a boat, you have to show passport verification. So everywhere, imbued within corporations and the world, essentially you are using your verification to get around and to function and to do things. So what we need to do is you and me and everyone else, we need to create systems which do not require verification. They can require money, which is where something like cryptocurrency, for example, or metals, actual like gold and silver, or if you still want to use, bank transfer or paper money or whatever. But of course, chances are, depending on how secure you want it to be, is what kind of currency you will use. We need to create our own systems, which means firstly, we need to create our own systems of banking, storing money. Now, of course, we have cryptocurrency. It's a bit annoying because a lot of the cryptocurrency requires you, in fact, pretty much all the sites require you to have verification. And then you have to connect the bank to it, which is also verified and all this stuff to, quote unquote, stop illegal activity, but also to stop any kind of outer system stuff. That doesn't mean that you can't have a personal wallet. You can buy a hard wallet, or you can have a software wallet, for example. Most of them are on the cloud, sadly, so it's not a pure, wallet. But going on, there are some programs you can use to, I think, make a pure, an actual hardware wallet on your own. So that's one of the things that has been essentially ticked off the box. We also need private communication networks. All of these social medias are very inclined to have you register your phone and your personal details and such. They want to remove any kind of anonymity, because then, you can be essentially tracked, traced, and charged if you do anything bad, you say anything naughty, which is not allowed. For example, as we saw with, the last few years, if you talked against the agenda that was around, you would essentially be, you would be in a bit of trouble. So we need communications networks which are completely encrypted and do not require any kind of verification. And of course, an email service is fine. I think it's fine to have an email. Of course, we need email services which are not beholden to the government, basically under the control of the government or some kind of evil corporation or anything like that. Because again, that's how it is. It's the government that says to these corporations, you must do this, you must not do that. They essentially dictate terms, and the corporations say, okay. Sometimes, of course, it's the opposite with the corporation is strong enough where it says like, hey, can you make this special rule? And the government's like, okay, you've given us lots of money. Yes, thank you very much. We'll do that. So going on, there are also communication networks which are secure and, at least, as far as I know, and are free, and you do not need verification. So this is another thing which has already been done. We also need market services. Now, there are some market services. Basically, what I mean is to buy and sell and trade and such that are good. Though, of course, they're a little shifty and they're a little hard to get to. For example, going onto Tor and going onto these marketplaces is a bit kind of shifty. I envision, for example, maybe you've got a program or you have a website where you can access the program, the servers, which is all peer-to-peer. So all this needs to be peer-to-peer. The cryptocurrency needs to be peer-to-peer. The money needs to be peer-to-peer. The communications needs to be peer-to-peer. Downloading and uploading of software needs to be peer-to-peer. Trading needs to be a peer-to-peer trading kind of thing. And how that works, I'm not quite sure yet. It all needs to be peer-to-peer. It can't be on servers, because servers can be shut down, and servers are a centralization of power. I'm not saying it's always going to be bad if you centralize things on a server, but you can't shut down peer-to-peer torrenting. You can only shut down the websites that put the torrents on them, for example. You can't shut down peer-to-peer communication. You can only shut down people from trading their, ID tags to add each other in the communications network. Going on, so we're going to need that. A way to trade, essentially. And I envision a program that handles all of this. It handles the finance side, it handles the communication side, it handles goods and services, etc. Also, we're going to need land which is not of a government. Now, the problem with governments is that they say, basically, I control all the land, and they do not sell land, they rent it out to you, which is a problem because you do not own your land. Even if you purchase a block of land at the house, you do not own that in most countries. Some of them you can. Some of those tax haven countries you do. But I don't know about you. I don't want to live in the Cayman Islands. I don't want to live in the Bahamas. So we're going to need to figure out a way to essentially take land back from the government. And of course, how do you do that? Well, you stick a flag in the land and you put a barrier around it, and you stand around with a gun, and if someone comes to your land, you shoot them. That's basically the summarized version of it. Now, that's kind of an issue because you're dealing with a country or certain countries that have immense military power. Not saying that a group of individuals couldn't stand up against the military, because we've seen it multiple times. I mean, if you look at the Middle Eastern wars, what a shit show they are. I'd rather not have to go to war against the military or the police of a certain country, because at the end of the day, these are people. Sadly, they take on these jobs and basically enslave themselves and become the henchmen or the dogs of a certain country. It's going to be an interesting one to figure out, essentially. How do we properly buy land? Because otherwise we're basically paying land tax. Be it council rates, they call it in my country, land tax, property tax, all this other tax. We don't need to be paying any tax. Tax is a crime to the people. If the government can't make their own money, then they should not be in power at all. They shouldn't be taxing us, basically. So that's why if you have your own money, it's tax free. If you have of course, you still say that you're going to pay transfer fees for all this bullshit, stuff. Maybe we can eliminate that in the future with peer-to-peer. Cryptocurrency isn't the be-all end-all. I'm being honest. Cryptocurrency has a lot of issues. It's stupidly expensive to transfer, to the point where it's actually really annoying. 5% transfer fees? That's ridiculous. That's not feasible for much use. So even cryptocurrency is a start. It is a start of this, and it definitely is. It's like the old school telephone where you dial it with your fingers or you press the buttons, maybe another one there. We want the computer, or the smartphone maybe. We want the smartphone version. We don't want the old school telephone. We want the next generation, which we will have. Okay, so basically land, we're going to need to figure that out. I don't know how to, besides kind of taking over the government or just basically saying, this is my land, this is micronation, and then fighting them to the death. I don't really understand how to do that. Basically, at that point, you go against the king, so it's a bit of a complicated issue, but maybe it's simpler than we think. Going on. Next one is transportation. How do you go along roads which, if you don't have verification, if you don't have registration, all this junk, that you will get fined? Well, again, we can make our own roads, and we're going to have to say this is specifically our roads or something like that. I'm not sure. Again, it kind of comes to a lot of these problems come to we need to basically take over the land. And once we own the land properly, we can dictate and say and do whatever we want, and then make our own services, our own posts, our own transportation, our own currency, our own everything, which is not part of the system. See, the problem is all of these governments are part of this matrix system, essentially, of control, which wants to enslave you through the identification and through all this bullshit, and basically so they can tax you to death and control you, and so you do not rise up and control them, because at the end of the day we actually have power, and they don't want you to know that. They don't want you to know that you could be a king, you could rule some land, you could create your own world, essentially. And we have basically these parasites, which, if you really look into them, a lot of them are pedophiles, a lot of them are money launderers in offshore bank accounts, doing all kinds of shifty business. A lot of them are they're in cahoots with giant corporations, doing a lot of very shifty stuff. These people are not the people who are meant to lead us. And either way, I don't think we should have a government. I think we should be our own government. The only issue is that, we need rulership of land. Next one's transportation. Transportation, but air and boat travel. This basically requires you to have your own aeroplane, your own boat, which is going to become more viable and more realistic once we have cheaper, lighter electric batteries and better solar panels. Because what happens then is that you And also, if once we figure out better high atmosphere etheric energy absorption, basically absorbing the high voltage like electrostatic in the air, which is a legitimate thing if you look it up. You could probably run things off that, like run an airplane off that, for example, or a helicopter or whatever. If it was electromagnetic, it had an electromagnetic engine, you could probably run it off that, I imagine. So that's one thing for the future. Of course, even if we do get lighter batteries and better solar panels, you could make a solar boat. It's not that really, just get a regular boat and then just hook some different parts up to it. Reason why oil and gas isn't the best is because, again, that requires a network, that requires all this infrastructure. Having your own solar panels and batteries and charge controllers and inverters and all this stuff and cables and wires and whatever doesn't really. Of course, you still need to buy all this stuff, but I think it's a bit better and easier personally than having to use oil and gas. Transportation is one, trade, currency, well, that's another, communication is another, land is another. That's pretty much it, isn't it? Other than that, things like community and marriage and all that kind of stuff, we figure that out on our own. Food and product manufacturing and all that, again, that comes from land. So hopefully this has given you some ideas. Really, as I said, it relies on the ID. And it doesn't mean to burn your ID because you're probably going to still need it. I think we need to get to a point where we are strong enough, self-sufficient enough, smart enough, knowledgeable enough, where we do not need these IDs anymore, and we can truly take over the land and build our own systems and break away from these parasites. You can think it's almost like, it's a bit, the way I see it, it's almost like if you watch the movie The Matrix, everyone's in the pods, and you want to get to the point where you break out of the pod and living outside of the fake system which everyone is living in, which is basically that 9 to 5 working. Like, the idea of a baby being born in a hospital is the most disgusting thing I could ever think of. The amount of stress you must be under as like a mother doing that, like, ugh. And then they try to do this stuff to your child and register it and all this, ugh. It's so unnatural. Everything's become so unnatural, and we need to get back to nature. We need to get back to what is right, what is harmonic and healthy and good. And that starts with eliminating the government and taking control of our own lives again. So yeah, anyway, we also, because of the nature of space, we can't just bugger off to space because it probably isn't what we think it is. It probably isn't, probably planets are not real physical things that you can just land on. Otherwise, of course, the billionaire's idea of, well, I'll just bugger off to space and just, build her a little empire here and let Earth there and let Earth burn itself to the ground. Which, if we keep these parasites in power, will eventually happen. So we do have to, they're already trying to start World War III over what? Nothing, essentially. So yeah, we kind of need to do something, and it starts with improving your own life, taking control of your own life, developing all the skills you need, becoming self-sufficient and self-reliable and all this stuff. And eventually I think we're going to see the sun rise. We're going to see the light in the tunnel that tells us what to do, and there will be enough of us where we will do it. We will break free from this illusion, this fake world, and all of the kind of people who are trapped in the pods. They will be forcefully evacuated, and I do not give two shits if they have not woken up by now. Then they are food for the boars and the who knows, whatever wild animals that are out there, at some point. If they're not, if you haven't woken up by now, geez. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Of course, feel free to check the links in the description, and have a nice day. Goodbye.